The Rise of Skywalker is the worst movie I have ever seen. It's a crime against not only Star Wars, but the art of film in general. It is nothing more than a cobbled together, zombified rehashing of Return of the Jedi. J.J. Abrams should never be allowed to direct anything ever again. If there was such a thing as creative prison, J.J. and Chris Terrio should be in the maximum security block. It makes The Last Jedi look genuinely good by comparison. I never thought I'd be using good and The Last Jedi in the same sentence, but these are the times we live in. The Emperor is back, and he's pissed. He is poised to attack the entire galaxy with his formerly submerged fleet of Death Star laser-equipped Star Destroyers. Death Star laser-equipped Star Destroyers? Yes, Death Star laser-equipped Star Destroyers. The film seems to have a motif of spacefaring vessels being stored underwater for decades at a time to no detriment. Just a quick flick of your force-filled fingers and your spacecraft rises from the sea unfettered. Kylo Ren visits the Emperor on his spooky bad guy planet, and he commands him to go kill Rey. How's the Emperor alive? No time for that shit. We have a plot to get to. And so begins the worst movie in the franchise. Kylo proceeds to chase Rey throughout the galaxy, always 2 steps behind. Is this reading like a fan fiction written about a decade ago? Nope. Professional screenwriters were paid to birth this miserable dreck from their befouled, befuddled brains. After about an hour and a half of a cat-and-mouse game featuring our 2 mirthless, diametrically opposed Force users, the movie arrives at the final battle between the 2. Kylo once again tries to convert Rey to his cause. She obviously refuses, which causes yet another pointless lightsaber battle to ensue. After the 2 flail wildly about for about 4 minutes, Kylo seemingly overpowers Rey and is poised to strike the final blow. It is in this moment that Leia reaches out through the Force and essentially tells her son, "Don't kill her!" Alright, I'ma head out. Both Kylo and Rey feel her demise through the Force, and Rey takes the opportunity to stab Kylo through the chest as he mourns his mother's passing. Classic Jedi shit right there. Kylo lays there dying, remorseful over the destructive path he has taken. Or he needs to take a shit. You can't really tell from the acting. Anyway, Rey decides to use her Force heal to repair Kylo's fatal injuries. She then decides to fuck off as the plot needs to keep moving. Kylo remains on the Death Star ruins. In a moment of introspection, Kylo hears a voice, and that voice is none other than Han Solo. He turns around and there he is, Han Solo. After a short conversation, Han's ghost manages to convince Kylo to become a good guy. Makes you wonder why that shit didn't work the first time, but whatever. Kylo throws his lightsaber into the ocean, presumably abandoning the dark side. Or maybe he just wanted to see if it would skip across the water. Rey flees back to the planet we found Luke on in The Last Jedi. She decides to have a bonfire and use Kylo's ship as kindling. Before she can dispose of her lightsaber and bust out the marshmallows, Luke's ghost shows up. He gives her motivation to continue her crusade against the bad guys. After some dialogue and yet another wasted performance from Mark Hamill, Rey is convinced to return to the fight. Unfortunately, in her angst, she destroyed her only way off the planet. Luckily for her, Luke raises his X-Wing from the ocean and bequeaths his former starfighter to her. If the writers of this movie ever run into a snag in the plot, they just raise something out of the water. It's a neat writing trick you can learn. It's called bullshit. A useful tool for any prospective storytellers. With a new ship in tow, Rey proceeds to the final conflict of the film. Rey arrives on the Emperor's spooky Sith planet on Luke's X-Wing, which has probably been sitting it was sitting at the bottom of the ocean for probably about two decades without maintenance, yet it still flies just like the old days. Sounds stupid? Too bad. We have to keep the plot moving. After crawling under the big spooky triangle rock, Rey arrives in the room we saw Kylo at in the beginning of the film. It becomes apparent that not only is the Emperor here, but he also has a council of Force-using Death Eaters watching from the gallery. After some bloviating from Palpatine, Rey reveals that she is determined to buck his prophecy and not become Rey Palpatine. That's right, one of the major reveals of this film is that Rey is in fact the granddaughter of Sheev Palpatine. My only question is, who would fuck the Emperor? Just imagine that old bag of bones huffing and croaking as he slams his shriveled Sith cock into some poor girl before blowing his load of pockmarked midichlorians. He always struck me as a character that had little need for physical intimacy, or any intimacy for that matter. After the Emperor explains his evil plan in the tradition of all low-grade mustache-twirling villains, the Rebel fleet and Kylo Ren arrive separately to turn the tide of battle. Kylo fights the Knights of Ren as Rey is about to cut the Emperor down. As the moment of defeat seemingly arrives, Rey does her best Chris Angel impression and bloops her lightsaber over to Kylo, who quite literally shrugs off the convenience of the whole thing, much like the single-celled organisms who penned this travesty. A space battle is taking place in the skies above, and it's also trite and boring. I'm not even going to discuss it. Suffice to say, there's a moment where a rebel dropship lands on a Sith command ship, and a cavalry charge of space horses erupts from the vessel like diarrhea from J.J. Abrams' ears. Beyond that utter absurdity, it's standard Star Wars space combat. Back at the Sith Fight Club, Rey and Kylo stand side by side against the Emperor. He states that they have formed some sort of unique force bond that allows him to essentially drain their essence and become young and powerful once again. After blasting some magic from his fingertips, the Emperor is seemingly restored. He tosses Kylo aside, much like the screenwriters did, and proceeds to taunt Rey about her doomed friends. He looks to the sky and blasts out a torrent of dark side magic, which seemingly incapacitates most of the rebel fleet. Rey lays on the ground helpless until she starts hearing the voices of every Jedi who ever lived. Apparently, a quick pep talk from these multifarious boring cunts is all she needed to gain ultimate power in the Force. This whole trilogy could have been avoided with the Force equivalent of a Skype call. As she rises once again to face her foe, the Emperor does something totally fresh and new and shoots Force lightning out of his fingertips. This time, however, Rey deflects the lightning that was previously overwhelming 1,000-ton starships with her lightsaber. Palpatine doesn't consider stopping the attack and proceeds to disintegrate himself so this movie and franchise can come to an end. The greatest villain in Star Wars is my personal hero for the day. Rey seemingly dies from an overdose of bad storytelling. Kylo Ren turns out to be alive and rushes to her side. He uses his Force powers to transfer his life force to Rey and save her life. Rey awakens shortly after and kisses Kylo right on the lips. Did she forget that this asshole killed her surrogate and his actual father? Doesn't matter. People on the internet ship this, so it was thrown in last minute to appease fans of this trilogy. The few that are left, anyway. Kylo dies shortly after, presumably from losing the will to live in this shitty universe. The film starts off on the wrong foot with a faulty premise. The Emperor is alive. Plot twist. No, the Emperor was thrown down a reactor shaft and literally exploded when he reached the bottom. Then the shaft he exploded in exploded. That's exploded squared if you're keeping score. Bringing him back like this smacks of complete creative bankruptcy. This script is the equivalent of a lesser student copying off a smarter one. It is both entirely derivative and entirely disrespectful of Return of the Jedi and the original trilogy. I'm sure there are many people who worked hard on this film, especially the special effects department. It's genuinely sad to see the actors and crew's talents wasted by hilariously lazy and inept screenwriters. This film gives off the impression that it was written in a week, and most of that week was spent in a drunken haze. The irony of this film's only purpose being to make money is the fact that the critical reviews and general word of mouth will likely result in this film being the lowest grossing in the entire sequel trilogy, if not the franchise. You fucked up, Mr. Abrams. Try harder next time. Disney should be ashamed of themselves. Their rampant corporate greed has raped and battered Star Wars like a quadriplegic Taiwanese hooker. I have no words for the collection of images I just watched. The ineptitude on display on nearly every level of the film is so disturbing it's hard to even express in English. Congratulations, Disney. You've outdone yourself this time. You have well and truly murdered Star Wars. I hope George Lucas has enjoyed the untold thousands of food court meals he has reaped from selling his brainchild to the fumbling, bungling hands of the big bad mouse.